They showed up with clipboards, fake patches, and empty threats, convinced they could scare a man into giving up his home. What they didn't know was that 6 Navy SEALs were already on their way to his driveway. It began with a sharp, deliberate pounding, 3 heavy knocks against the front door of Calvin Dunmore's house in Concord, North Carolina. It wasn't late, but it wasn't early either, just past 6, when most people were settling in, dinner simmering, TV flickering in living rooms. Calvin had been rinsing a plate when the noise hit. Something about it wasn't casual. It wasn't a neighbor's knock. It was forceful, commanding. He dried his hands, walked to the door, and felt the weight of that knock still hanging in his chest. Calvin wasn't a man who rattled easy. At 44, he'd survived financial setbacks, raised kids, even made it through a divorce. But the moment he opened that door, his night twisted into something he couldn't have imagined. 2 men stood on his porch, tactical vests, bold white lettering. HOA Enforcement Division. They looked like law enforcement, radios, clipboards, stern expressions. The taller one, shaved head and a scar above his brow, spoke first. "Mr. Dunmore?" Calvin blinked. "Yeah, that's me. You're in violation of neighborhood code," the man said mechanically. "Per HOA policy, you're required to vacate this property within 48 hours. Calvin laughed, short, disbelieving. "Vacate? What are you talking about? I own this house. Mortgage has been paid for 7 years. I just spoke to the HOA president last month." The second man, shorter, stockier, mirrored sunglasses reflecting the porch light, stepped forward. "Doesn't matter. You're out of compliance. We're here to serve notice. You've got 2 days to clear out." For a second, Calvin thought it had to be a joke. He looked at their patch again. HOA Enforcement Division. He'd lived here a decade, seen late dues notices, trash bin warnings, tallgrass fines, but never anything like this. Never armed posers telling someone to get out. "This makes no sense," Calvin said, voice tightening. "If there was an issue, I'd get a letter. Maybe a fine. Not 2 guys in tactical gear." The tall one leaned in slightly, making the air heavier. "Sir, we're not here to debate. We're here to enforce. Leave quietly, or we escalate." Calvin's jaw tensed. He wasn't a fighter, but he wasn't stupid either. And something about these guys was wrong. Their badges looked like cheap printouts. Their clipboards had generic templates, no letterhead, no signatures. And their radios? Not even turned on. "Let me ask you something," Calvin said, folding his arms. "Who sent you? What's the president's name? What violation do you think I broke?" The stocky one stepped forward, clearly irritated. "Don't make this harder. You've got a chance to walk away on your own terms." Calvin stared them down. They weren't HOA. They weren't anything official. They were fakes, and they were on his property, trying to bully him out of his own house. "You 2 need to get off my property," Calvin said, voice sharp. "Right now." The tall one smirked. "Or what? You gonna call the police and say the HOA came to your door? Good luck." Calvin's chest tightened, not from fear, but anger. This wasn't confusion. It was a scam, and a bold one. He glanced down the street hoping a neighbor might see, but no one was out, just a distant lawn mower and a barking dog. The stocky one growled, "Last warning. 48 hours. After that, we handle it our way." Calvin didn't move. He stared them down until they finally walked off toward a black SUV parked on the curb. He shut the door, locked it, his hands trembling with fury. He didn't know yet that backup was already on the way. Old friends who were about to turn this night upside down. But trouble wasn't done knocking. Calvin paced his living room, thoughts spinning. Who had the nerve to show up like fake cops and threaten him? He pulled out his phone, hovered over the HOA president's number, then stopped. Something told him not to call. These guys wanted him rattled, making panic calls. He wasn't giving them that satisfaction. Instead, he cracked the blinds and looked outside. The black SUV was still there. The men hadn't left. The driver sat still, the passenger tapping on a tablet, watching him. Waiting. "Yeah, real official," Calvin muttered. He opened the door and stepped onto the porch. He wasn't hiding. "Hey," he called, loud enough for half the neighborhood. "Mind telling me who sent you?" The SUV door opened. The tall one stepped out again, boots heavy on the pavement. "We already told you," he said stiffly. "We're here on behalf of the HOA." Calvin shook his head. "No. You threw out a line and hoped I'd bite. So let's try again. Name. Which board member sent you?" The man stopped at the lawn's edge, jaw twitching. You're asking too many questions for a guy who's about to be homeless. That did it. Calvin stepped off his porch until they were just feet apart. You picked the wrong door, he said. I've paid into this neighborhood longer than you've been around. If the board had an issue, I'd get an email, a letter, not two clowns in fake vests. The passenger got out, strolling up with those mirrored shades. He shoved a paper toward Calvin. Here, read it. Calvin snatched it. It was laughable. No seal, no signatures, just a typed template. You think anyone's falling for this garbage? He said, waving it. This isn't worth the printer ink. The shorter one bristled. You don't get it. We don't need you to believe us. We just need you to leave. Most people don't argue. They're scared. Then you came to the wrong house, Calvin snapped. Silence stretched thick between them. The tall one leaned forward. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Nobody wants the hard way. Calvin didn't budge. His pulse thudded harder, not fear, but adrenaline. These weren't scammers. They were predators counting on intimidation. But Calvin had been through real battles. He wasn't folding to a fake eviction. You step on this porch again, Calvin said quietly, and you'll regret it. The shorter one sneered. What are you going to do? Call the cops? They'll take hours, and we'll be long gone. Calvin's lips curled into a faint smile. I won't need the cops. The tall one tilted his head. Oh yeah? Who you got? Calvin's eyes drifted toward the end of the street. 3 sets of headlights turning the corner, rolling slow. The imposters didn't notice. But Calvin did. He knew those cars. He knew those men. His backup wasn't a what. It was a who. The taller man glanced over his shoulder and frowned. Friends of yours? Calvin folded his arms. You could say that. The SUV stopped. Engines cut. Doors opened. 6 men stepped out, broad shoulders, sharp eyes, a presence you don't mistake. Jonas Redden, Marcus and Vale, Pierce Lockhart, Damian Crowell, Silas Trent, Von Kessler, all former Navy SEALs, all Calvin's brothers in arms. The tall imposter's smirk faded, and the confrontation was just beginning. When the SEALs stepped onto that driveway, the air changed. The imposters stiffened, their earlier swagger flickering. These weren't casual visitors. This was a wall of discipline and quiet power. Jonas Redden, tall, gray-streaked beard, a stare that froze rooms, spoke first. Cal, what's happening here? His voice was calm, but edged with steel. Calvin motioned to the fake enforcers. These clowns say they're from the HOA. Told me I've got 2 days to leave my own house. The men exchanged looks. Pierce Lockhart barked a laugh. You're kidding. HOA Enforcement Division? Never heard of it. Show us real credentials. The tall imposter tried to hold his ground. This is official business. Doesn't concern you. Step aside. Jonas didn't move. None of them did. You just made it our business. Silas Trent leaned in, eyeing the patches. Those were bought online. Stitching's too clean. Nowhere. Real field gear doesn't look like that. The shorter imposter snapped. We're not debating uniforms. We're enforcing rules. Damian Crowell crossed his arms. Then name the rules. Name the code. Should be easy if you're legit. The imposters hesitated. A tiny pause, but enough. Von Kessler chuckled. These guys are bluffing so hard it hurts. Calvin felt relief crash through him. He wasn't imagining it. These men were frauds. And now he had people behind him who could see right through the lies. The tall imposter tried again, desperate. You don't understand how serious this is. He's in violation. He has to leave. We've got paperwork. Jonas cut him off, holding up the flimsy notice. Paperwork? My kid could type this up in 10 minutes. No signatures, no legal codes, nothing binding. You think anyone's buying this? The imposter's jaw clenched. He stepped closer, but Jonas didn't budge an inch. Calvin noticed neighbors peeking through blinds now, some stepping onto porches. Word was spreading, and the tension pulling people outside was only growing thicker. Pierce, never one to soften his words, leaned forward. Let me ask you something straight. What's the game here? You guys running a scam? Picking random houses and hoping to scare folks into leaving so you can rob them? The shorter man snapped. Watch your mouth. Or what? Pierce shot back, voice sharpening. You gonna arrest us with those toy radios? Maybe flash those dollar store badges again. Silas grinned, though his tone stayed cold. You made a big mistake coming here. You thought you'd find someone who'd panic and fold. Instead, you found a guy with 6 brothers who don't back down. Calvin stepped forward, confidence rising. You really thought I'd believe the HOA sent you wearing combat vests and no IDs? That I just pack up and leave? I worked too hard for this house. My kids grew up here. You don't get to walk in and threaten me. The tall imposter's confidence cracked. His shoulders dipped, his stance loosening as he realized the numbers weren't in his favor. Still, he forced himself to speak. You think this is a joke? You're interfering with official duties. That's a crime. Vaughn barked a laugh. The only crime here is you pretending to be something you're not. And impersonating law enforcement carries a real sentence. The imposters exchanged nervous looks. They weren't used to being challenged this directly. Calvin suddenly saw how rehearsed they'd been, throwing out vague lines, relying on intimidation, assuming no one would question them. But now their script was falling apart, and they had no backup plan. Jonas folded the fake notice in half and stuffed it into the tall man's vest. Here's the deal. 2 choices. Get in your car and drive off this street right now, or stay and let us call the police. Either way, this isn't ending how you planned. The shorter imposter clenched his jaw, muttering. The taller one scanned the group, calculating. Calvin could see the hesitation. He was trying to figure out if these men were bluffing. What he didn't know was that Jonas already had his phone out, thumb hovering over the call button. Just as the tension peaked, something shifted. The street went strangely still. Neighbors froze on porches and behind windows, listening but too wary to step in. Calvin stood firm, heart pounding in sync with the standoff. The imposter's earlier swagger was fading fast. Then an engine's low rumble cut through the silence. A dark pickup turned onto the block, headlights slicing through the evening haze. It rolled to a stop behind the imposter's SUV. Pierce uncrossed his arms with a half-smile. Looks like the cavalry just showed up. From the driver's seat stepped Dean Morick, another former SEAL who hadn't made it on time to the reunion. Broader than the rest, steady as stone, he walked up the driveway with the calm, scanning focus only trained men have. Some party you've got going, Cal, he said dryly. Calvin let out a breath. Glad you made it, brother. You walked into a mess. Dean looked the imposters up and down. And who are these? They claim they're HOA cops, Jonas said flatly. Dean raised a brow, almost amused. HOA cops. That's a new one. The imposters didn't appreciate the laughter. The tall one stepped forward again. This isn't a joke. He's out of compliance. This is official notice. Dean stopped walking, studied him. Official? That vest is stitched wrong, your radio's not on, and that patch looks like it came off eBay. You're faking it. The man bristled, but Dean's certainty rattled him. Marcus and Vale stepped forward, Marcus speaking low but loud enough for neighbors to hear. The problem with pretending to be something you're not? Eventually someone who knows the real thing shows up and exposes every flaw. The shorter imposter spat. We don't answer to you. We're here on business. Step aside. Silas tilted his head. Business? What? Running a shakedown in broad daylight. You picked the wrong address. This isn't a scared retiree or a single mom you can push around. This man has friends who won't let you bully him. Calvin stepped up beside Silas, anger now distilled into conviction. I'm not going anywhere. Neither are these men. So why don't you tell me the real reason you're here? The imposters exchanged a glance. Their silence said everything. The tall one's jaw tightened, but their scripted lines were gone. They had nothing left. Dean's calm voice cut in. I've seen this play before. Fake authority, intimidation. You scare just enough people into leaving, then walk off with valuables. Maybe even flip the property if you're bold. But you messed up. You came to a house owned by a man who doesn't scare. And worse, you showed up on the same day 7 SEALs got together. Across the street, neighbors murmured. Phones lifted higher. The imposters had thought they were the hunters. Now they were the ones being cornered. The tall one snapped. You're interfering with federal business. That's obstruction. Jonas barked a laugh, so sharp the man flinched. Federal? HOA isn't federal. And neither are you. The shorter imposter's hand twitched near his vest. Instantly, Vaughn's voice boomed. Don't move that hand. The man froze. The power dynamic was no longer even close. The street had become a stage. Neighbors recording, kids peeking through curtains, and the imposters visibly cracking under pressure. Calvin's friends stood like a wall between him and the frauds. The tall imposter muttered to his partner, We'll come back another time. Dean stepped in closer. No, you won't. Because next time it won't just be neighbors with cameras, it'll be the police. And every second of this is on video. The imposters hesitated, trapped between humiliation and retreat. Jonas broke the silence. Let's make this simple. If you're official, show your IDs. The tall one smirked weakly. We don't have to prove anything to you. Then you've already proven everything we need, Jonas said. Pierce stepped forward, humor sharp as a blade. You boys came here thinking you could scare a homeowner into packing up. Thought the vest, the boots, the act would be enough. But you didn't check who lives here. That was your mistake. The shorter imposter puffed his chest. We're authorized. Damien cut in, voice slicing through the air. Authorized by who? Name? Contact? HOA president? City official? Anybody. Silence. Vaughn laughed a humorless laugh. Thought so. You came with a script, and now it's falling apart. More neighbors drifted out, phones raised. What was meant to be a private intimidation was turning into a public embarrassment. Silas studied them. What exactly was the plan? Scare him into leaving, then what? Break in? Strip the place? Squat. You didn't think any of it through. Calvin stepped forward. That's what makes me sick. You thought I'd just crumble. You don't know me at all. The taller imposter's expression hardened. You don't know who you're dealing with. Jonas moved in until they were inches apart. No, you don't know who you're dealing with. Every man here has faced worse than you. You don't scare us. You don't even register. The imposter opened his mouth, but Jonas raised a hand. Save it. We don't need excuses. We need you gone. The shorter one tried to regain some authority, lifting his clipboard like it meant something. We've got papers. Pierce snatched it from his hand, flipped through it, and laughed. Authority? This is a printout from an online eviction template. You didn't even change the default font. He tore it in half and tossed it aside. Neighbors chuckled. Damien crossed his arms. You've got one move left. Walk away. The tall imposter's eyes darted from the veterans to the SUV. He was bruised, but they could all see he still wasn't ready to fully back down. Calvin didn't ease up. You're finished here. Whatever you thought you'd pull, it's over. And you're not coming back. A beat of silence. Then Jonas looked to Calvin. Cal, call it. Calvin's voice carried across the lawn. You heard him. Get off my property. The imposters hesitated, pride fighting reality. Cameras were everywhere. Every exit was a loss. They turned toward their SUV, but something in their posture shifted. They weren't leaving quietly. The taller one's jaw worked, fists tightening. He wasn't retreating. He was looking for an opening. Careful, Jonas muttered. The shorter imposter tugged at his vest, gathering himself. You think you can humiliate us? You think you can just... He froze when a fresh wave of phones rose from the crowd. Every word, every movement, recorded. Pierce grinned. Sharp as a blade, Pierce leaned in. Go on, finish that sentence. Make it clear for the whole internet. The tall imposter snapped his head toward him. Shut your mouth. Pierce didn't move. Or what? You'll write me up in Comic Sans on one of your fake forms. A ripple of laughter rolled through the crowd. The imposters weren't just losing control. They were becoming the neighborhood punchline. Damien Crowell stepped forward, voice calm but edged with authority. You had the chance to walk away clean. You didn't take it. Don't make this worse. The tall one squared up, trying to salvage authority. You don't understand who we answer to. Jonas cut him off. No, you don't understand who you're standing in front of. Every man here has stood in places you wouldn't last 5 minutes. We know real authority, and you don't have it. The tall imposter swallowed. The shorter one tilted his chin at Calvin. This isn't over. You'll regret this. Before Calvin could speak, Von Kessler's voice boomed. Wrong. The only ones who'll regret anything are the two who picked the one street with 7 seals standing on it. As if on cue, another neighbor walked up with his dog, stopped, and hit record on his phone. More people gathered. Parents pulled kids closer, though the kids still peeked out to watch. It was no longer a confrontation. It was a community standing together. Calvin raised his voice. Keep pushing. Every second you stay, more cameras come out. This ends with the police, or with you walking away. Your call. The shorter imposter laughed nervously. Police won't do anything. Dean Morick, who'd been silent until now, spoke quietly. That's where you're wrong. Impersonating authority sticks. And you just admitted it on half a dozen phones. That hit them hard. Calvin saw it. The shift in their breathing, the restless glances toward the SUV. These weren't men ready for jail. They were con artists unraveling in daylight. Still, the tall one made one last attempt at bravado, jabbing a finger at Calvin. This isn't the end. We'll come back. Silas Trent's voice dropped to a razor whisper. No, you won't. Because next time, it won't just be us. The police will have your names, faces, plates. You won't get a second shot. The tall imposter froze. His partner tugged at his arm, whispering, let's go, but pride kept him rooted. Jonas stepped closer, his shadow stretching over the man. Holding out doesn't make you tough, it makes you desperate. And desperate men make mistakes. The tension thickened. Then finally, the tall imposter spat at the ground, turned, and stalked toward the SUV. His partner followed, head lowered. A low cheer rose from the neighbors. Not loud. Just enough to confirm everyone knew who won. Calvin exhaled, though his friends stayed alert. Jonas muttered, don't drop your guard. Men like that don't like losing. As the imposters climbed into the SUV, Calvin could feel it. This wasn't over. But before they could escape, fate added another twist. The engine rumbled, but the SUV didn't move. The tall one sat stiff behind the wheel. The shorter one tapped anxiously at the dashboard. Phones stayed aimed at them like a dozen spotlights. Jonas called out, drive off if you want. But try coming back later, and you won't just be neighborhood trouble. You'll be a criminal case. The tall imposter rolled down his window halfway. You people don't get it. We've got authorization. Pierce barked a laugh. Then show it. A real badge. A real ID. Not something printed at home. Silas stepped forward, recording. Give us your supervisor's name, for the record. What agency? What number can we call? No answer. The crowd murmured louder. The lie was unraveling fast. Calvin added, you know the real HOA president? Patricia Landon. I've got her number. Should I call her right now, so she can confirm she's never heard of you? The tall imposter's eyes broke contact. That single crack sent whispers rippling through the crowd. Vaughn's voice cut in. You thought a fake vest and rehearsed lines would scare this man out of his home. But you didn't count on people standing together. The shorter one snapped, shoving his door open and pointing at Vaughn. You don't know what you're messing with. Jonas stepped between them before he finished. Put your finger down. Now. The man froze, then slowly lowered his hand. Jonas leaned in. Threaten me if you want. But your scam is finished. Everyone here knows it. And soon the cops will too. The shorter imposter looked around, seeing every phone pointed at him. The illusion of control was gone. Calvin raised his voice for the whole block. These men came to my porch claiming to be HOA enforcement. They gave me fake papers. They threatened me. But they don't work for the HOA, they're scammers. Gasps spread. Cameras zoomed in. Their scheme didn't just crack, it collapsed. Pierce clapped once. Show's over. Get in the SUV and disappear before the real cops show up. The tall one tried a final threat. You'll regret putting this online. Silas smirked. No, you'll regret ever showing up here. The shorter one muttered, you haven't seen the last of us. Dean stepped forward, voice calm as stone. Yes, we have. Because next time, you'll be greeted by squad cars. The imposters slammed their doors and sped off. Neighbors erupted in conversation as the vehicle disappeared. Calvin let out a long breath. That's it then. Jonas shook his head. Not yet. They'll be back, or someone like them. Time to get the cops involved. Calvin nodded and reached for his phone, but sirens were already echoing closer. Blue lights swept across the block as two patrol cars boxed in the imposter's SUV at the stop sign. Tires screeched. Doors flew open. Officers approached with hands near their holsters. Vehicle off. Hands where we can see them. Kids pressed against windows. Neighbors crowded porches. Every phone stayed raised. The imposters climbed out slowly, their fake bravado evaporating under real authority. Jonas murmured to Calvin, now we'll see how official they really are. Sergeant Willis, a broad-shouldered veteran officer, swept his flashlight through the SUV. Props. Not even police-grade gear. Another officer held up the fake vest. You buy this online? Stitching's not even right. We're with HOA enforcement, the tall one insisted weakly. This is a misunderstanding. Willis lifted a brow. HOA enforcement isn't real. And even if it were, you wouldn't be dressed like this, making threats. Calvin stepped forward. They told me I had 48 hours to leave my own house. They gave me fake papers. They said they'd handle it if I didn't comply. Outrage rippled through the neighbors again. The younger officer turned back to the imposters. You realize impersonating law enforcement is a felony, right? We weren't impersonating cops, the tall man insisted. The HOA sent us. Pierce shouted from behind Calvin. Then call the HOA president, Patricia Landon. Ask her if she's ever heard of them. The officer nodded. We'll verify that. But until then, you two are detained. You can't do this, the shorter one snapped. Sergeant Willis stepped in close, voice like concrete. You're lucky this didn't escalate worse. Half this block has you on video. The imposter gritted his teeth and fell silent. Speaking loud enough for everyone to hear, Calvin said, these guys picked the wrong neighborhood. They thought they could run a scam and slip out before anyone asked questions. They didn't count on people standing together. The crowd murmured in agreement, a few even clapping. The tension hanging over the street slowly shifted into relief, though anger at what almost happened still lingered. The younger officer stepped in to cuff the imposters, reciting their rights with a crisp, practiced tone. The tall one stiffened, but didn't resist. The shorter one squirmed, shooting a desperate glare at Calvin. This isn't over. You'll regret this. Calvin met his stare without blinking. No. The only regret I'll have is if you ever show your face here again. As the officers led the men toward the patrol cars, Jonas leaned toward Calvin. This is what justice looks like in daylight. No shadows left to hide in. Calvin exhaled slowly, watching the imposters being locked inside the back seat. The neighborhood buzzed with relieved whispers, the tension lifting now that the threat was contained. But he couldn't shake the thought of what might have happened if his friends hadn't shown up. Sergeant Willis returned and nodded at him. We'll need your statement, and your neighbors too. But I'll tell you this, it's a good thing you stood your ground. These guys, they've probably run this scam before. Tonight, it ends. Calvin nodded gratefully. Appreciate it, officer. As the flashing lights washed over the street, neighbors slowly drifted away. Some thanked Calvin and his friends. Others offered their videos to the police. Kids whispered excitedly, retelling the whole scene like it was something out of a movie. But despite the relief, Calvin felt a tightness in his chest. This wasn't just about him. It was about every homeowner who could have been tricked if those men had knocked on a different door. And by morning, word of the incident would reach far past his block. By the next day, Calvin Dunmore Street had become the talk of the town. Local Facebook groups were buzzing. Phone footage was circulating. Even the Concord Gazette posted an article titled, Men Posing as HOA Enforcers Arrested After Confrontation on Residential Block. Calvin sat on his porch with a mug of coffee, watching cars slow as they passed his house. Some people rolled down their windows to look. Others nodded as they drove by. He wasn't used to attention, but last night had turned him into a reluctant local figure. Jonas joined him, leaning against the railing. You realize you're a hero now, right? Calvin shook his head. I'm not a hero. I just wasn't going to be bullied out of my own home. He took a sip. Honestly, I keep thinking what would have happened if I'd been alone. If you guys hadn't shown up. If the neighbors hadn't recorded it. Jonas's voice softened. That's the point. Last night showed how easy it is to get fooled when you're alone. But together? Whole different story. A group of neighbors walked up the porch. Mrs. Hadley spoke first. Calvin, we wanted to thank you. What you and your friends did, it kept this neighborhood safe. If those men had knocked on my door instead of yours, her voice trembled. Calvin stood. You don't need to thank me. I was scared too. But sometimes you don't pick the fight. It shows up anyway. Luis Ortega lifted his phone. I sent my video to the police. They said it'll help build the case. If you hadn't stood your ground, those guys might still be out there. Others nodded, patting Calvin on the back. Pierce walked over, smirking. Don't let him fool you. Cal's tougher than he looks. Calvin shot him a look, and the group chuckled. But under the laughter was the heavy reminder of how close the danger came. That afternoon, a community meeting filled the local rec center. Residents, HOA board members, and even reporters showed up. Calvin sat near the front, his friends forming a wall of quiet reassurance around him. HOA President Patricia Landon stood at the podium, tired but determined. Last night, 2 individuals impersonated HOA representatives and attempted to illegally evict a homeowner. Let me be clear. The HOA does not enforce anything through intimidation or surprise visits. This was a scam, and thanks to Calvin and his neighbors, it has been exposed. Applause filled the room, though Calvin shifted uncomfortably at the attention. Patricia continued, We're working with law enforcement to ensure this never happens again. But this is a reminder. If something seems off, speak up. Protect one another. After the meeting, people crowded around Calvin and his friends, sharing their own fears, scam calls, suspicious letters, strange knocks at night. What happened at Calvin's door wasn't an isolated case. It was part of a bigger pattern. Someone asked Dean how the SEALs knew what to do. His answer spread across the room. It wasn't about being veterans. It was about standing up for each other. You don't need military training to see through a lie. You just need courage, and sometimes backup. By the next day, that line was quoted all over community forums. Some residents even suggested starting a neighborhood watch, not to patrol, but to make sure no one felt alone if something suspicious happened again. Late that night, Calvin sat in his living room scrolling through those posts. He thought about how quickly everything had unfolded, how close he'd come to losing his temper, how close those men came to forcing their way in. He thought about his friends standing shoulder to shoulder with him, the neighbors raising their phones, the officers arriving with sirens blaring. The lesson wasn't just about keeping his home. It was about what happens when people refuse to be silent, when they refuse to be intimidated. But the true weight of it didn't hit until he finally sat alone on his back porch. The fire pit burned low. The street was silent. And the house, the home he'd always seen as unshakable, felt fragile in a way he'd never noticed. One knock from two strangers had nearly shattered that sense of safety. Jonas, who had lingered, eased into a seat across from him with a beer in hand. After a long moment, he said, "You know what stuck with me? Not the vests or the fake authority. It was how sure they were that you'd fold. They expected fear to do the work." Calvin nodded at the embers. "That's what makes me mad. Not just for me. My mom would have opened the door and let them in. They were counting on fear." Jonas leaned forward. "Fear works when people stand alone. But when a community stands together, scammers can't win." Calvin thought of the neighbors with their phones raised high, strangers becoming allies in minutes. He hadn't realized how strong his street could be until last night tested it. The next morning, his walk down the block felt different. Mrs. Hadley waved. Luis gave a thumbs up. Even the teenagers nodded respectfully. The imposters tried to divide and intimidate, but instead, they unified the neighborhood. Later that week, Sergeant Willis called. The imposters were facing multiple charges: impersonating law enforcement, attempted fraud, trespassing. Calvin felt relief and a sober gratitude. His father's old lessons echoed. Stand your ground. Tell the truth. Don't let fear write your story. That evening, the postponed cookout finally happened. Laughter rolled across the yard. Burgers sizzled. And for the first time, things felt normal again. Pierce raised his drink. "Here's to being in the right place at the right time." Dean added, "Here's to Calvin. He stood tall before we even got here. We just made the picture bigger." The bottles clinked, and something warm swelled in Calvin's chest. This house, his house, wasn't just walls and wood. It represented everything he'd worked for. Protecting it wasn't just about himself. It was about everyone who might face the same scam one day. As the fire dimmed, Calvin spoke quietly but clearly. "If last night taught me anything, it's that we don't get to choose when trouble shows up. But we do get to choose whether we face it alone or together. And together, we can handle anything." For a moment, everyone sat in thoughtful silence. Then Jonas cracked a joke about burnt hot dogs, and the warmth returned. Calvin knew the fear of that knock might never fully disappear, but neither would the memory of his neighbors and friends standing firm. So if there's a lesson in Calvin's story, it's this: never be afraid to question authority. Never let intimidation corner you. And always stand with the people around you. Together, you're stronger than any scam or threat. And if stories like this remind you of the power of courage, community, and truth, hit that subscribe button. There are more lessons worth telling, and more reminders that unity can turn fear into strength.